I was out with some friends on a Thursday night last summer. We went to some bars and had a few drinks while watching the game on TV. It was a pretty standard night for me, right up until I left and started heading home. My friends lived near the bar, but I had to take 2 buses to get home. My apartment was in one of the suburbs surrounding my city, and it was just under an hour for me to get back, including the bus transfer. I said goodbye to my friends and headed to the stop. The bus came within minutes, and I got on. After half an hour, I was at my transfer spot. I got off the bus and stood on the side of the road waiting. It was a rougher part of town. When I would hear about crimes on the news, it seemed more often than not that it happened around this area. The only person there was a younger woman who got into a car, probably an Uber, as soon as we got off. Besides that, the streets were unusually empty. Other than the bus stop, the street was lined with apartment buildings mostly. The occasional convenience store was squeezed in between them. While I was standing at the bus stop, I noticed something strange in the distance. There was a car parked on the side of the street with one of the side doors wide open. I looked closely, and I could tell that the car was empty. The lights were on, but it was definitely empty. It was strange, but I ignored it. My attention then turned to my phone. I checked the transit app to see if the bus was on schedule. To my dismay, it was delayed by 20 minutes. That was a long enough delay that it made more sense for me to walk. I'm a fast walker, so it would probably only take me half an hour to get home from there. I set off on foot, too cheap to get an Uber. That car was on my way, and when I passed it, I slowed to take a closer look. It was an older Ford, probably from the early 2000s. It was dark in color and had a few rust spots. The door was still wide open, and there was nobody around. I looked in all directions, but there was nobody. There was an older apartment building near where the car was, and the entrance was close. The car seemed to be in decent shape. It wasn't in an accident that I could tell. There were no broken windows or anything like that. Not knowing what else to do, I kept walking. I could have called the police, or just pushed the door closed, but I thought there could be an innocent explanation. Maybe the driver was nearby, and coming back soon, I thought. Not wanting to get involved, I kept walking. About 50 feet down the sidewalk, I saw a phone on the ground. It was a newer-looking Android phone that was just sitting face up on the ground. I bent down and picked it up, figuring I would try to return it to its owner. When the screen lit up, I could tell that it was locked. Not surprising at all, but that meant it would be a little harder to find the owner. I'm pretty tech-savvy, so I know how to use the SIM card to find the number of the owner, and I figured I would do that when I got home, or maybe the next day. However, not 5 steps later, the phone started vibrating. A call was coming in. I answered it and held it up to my ear. All I heard was static at first, but eventually I heard something terrifying. It was a man's scream, a scream of pure terror. I said hello into the phone, my voice full of concern. There was no answer though, and then the call disconnected. At that moment, I knew I stumbled upon something. That strange car, and now this. I turned my head around and looked at the empty car again. I could still see it in the distance, but this time there were 2 men standing beside it. Neither of them got in, but one of them was leaning into the open door. I quickened my pace, trying to get out of there as soon as possible. I looked back again, and this time I could see one of the 2 men was walking quickly behind me. He was gaining ground fast. I didn't know who he was, but the strangeness of the events leading up to this moment had me worried. I pulled out my phone and called 911. The man was on my tail, only 30 feet back. I looked back again, and this time the man spoke.
"Hey, I think you found my phone,"
he said, but I didn't trust him. I broke into a full-on sprint and didn't look back again. After another minute, I was completely out of breath. Without much left in me, I saw a police car up ahead, and it was getting closer. When it was about to pass me, I flagged it down. As soon as the car stopped, I looked back, and the man turned a corner and disappeared. The police officer pulled over and leaned over to me. I gave him a quick explanation of what happened. I pointed out the strange car, which was still there, and then I gave him the phone I found. After the police were done with me, I called an Uber and went home. It was days before I finally found out what happened that night. I was on my laptop browsing some news, and I found an article that sounded familiar. 2 brothers were arrested in connection with a kidnapping that took place that night in that part of town. According to the article, the car and phone belonged to one of the victims. Based on what I read, I believe the phone call was a desperate attempt to get help. I was lucky that I picked it up when I did, because I would have kept walking otherwise. Who knows what had happened to them. Overall, this was one of the craziest experiences I've ever had walking home at night. Being chased down the street gave me a feeling that I didn't even know was possible. This is a true story that happened to me a long while ago, when I was 10 years old. I lived in a small town in the leafy suburbs north of New York City, Westchester County. It didn't happen at my house, but at the house of one of my good friends at the time. He lived about a walking block away from where I lived. This was one of those towns in Westchester, where there are huge suburban houses set among oak and maple trees. It was a safe neighborhood, where I knew the owners of every house by name. The houses were generally quite large, with multiple floors and several bedrooms. The house where this takes place was extra large. Not large like the hotel from The Shining. It was a colonial house with 5 bedrooms and a second level. The family living there had 5 children, ranging in age from 10 to the upper teenage years at the time. The night this happened was dark and cold. The parents went out for dinner that evening, and I was there visiting my friend Byron, who was also 10, and his older brother Jacob, who was 12. It was just the 3 of us in that large house on a dark night in October. I knew the family quite well, so I felt very comfortable in their home. We were just goofing around that night, playing some games and watching TV, 3 kids in a large empty house. The 3 of us were in the kitchen with the lights on bright. It was around 11:30 at night, so it was late, but not super late. The phone rang, and Jacob, acting as the head of the household at 12, answered it. He said hello. We then saw Jacob get a peculiar look on his face, and hesitantly he said, "Just a minute." Then he did something a bit odd. He rested the phone down on a chair. This was one of those wall phones from the 90s. I don't think people still use those today. In any case, he put the phone down and just left it, then he walked upstairs. I remember thinking it was a strange thing to do, but still could have had a reasonable explanation. I looked at Byron, and he also had a curious expression on his face. We were quiet for a few seconds, and both our facial expressions showed signs that we thought it was weird. Jacob climbed the stairs and went into his parents' room, where there was a tabletop telephone. This is one of those old corded phones, where you pick up the receiver and hold it up to your ear. Not exactly an iPhone 10, and there's no way to know who was calling. He picked up the phone and said, "Okay, I'm upstairs. What's up?" A few moments went by with dead silence, and Jacob said, "Hello?" The voice came. It was calm but cold.
Jacob, there's a bomb inside your house, and it's gonna blow at any second.
Then a click. He dropped the phone and felt panic rush through his body. He ran out the bedroom, down the stairs, and started screaming, "Get out of the house. There's a bomb in the house," over and over again. We saw Jacob at the bottom of the stairs running. He did not waste any time heading straight out through the foyer, outside, and down the stone path that leads away from the house. He was out on the street. Byron and I ran, with confused fury as well. Jacob stopped running when he arrived at the other side of the street on the sidewalk. We looked across at this huge house, looking very eerie on the dark night. The house had several lights on, and the front door was open. It was empty. There was no one else around. The neighborhood was still and quiet. It was just us, 3 kids, the oldest being 12 years old. We were standing there on that cold October night, at almost midnight. All of us were scared out of our wits, waiting for the house to burst into flames. I was feeling chills through my body, and chills on my skin from the dark, cold air. Our jackets were still in the house, and we couldn't just go and get them so easily, because we thought the house could blow up at any second. Jacob explained what happened on the phone call upstairs, and that he thought it was his Uncle Jerry, but now we don't think it was. The voice must have just been similar on the phone. It was bizarre that the caller knew he answered on the ground floor and told him to go upstairs. How could he know this? We thought that maybe he told Jacob to go upstairs so that he wouldn't have enough time to get out of the house before the possible explosion. We stood there and waited. We were scared and cold. We thought the large house on this dark, cold night would soon be in flames, or there was a chance that it would be in flames, but it never blew up. We were still scared to go inside, though, because we thought that maybe it would blow up then. Eventually, we went to our neighbor's house. The father didn't seem as worried as we were, but he did call the police. The police came and searched the house. Byron and Jacob's parents also arrived home. It began to seem like the whole thing was just a practical joke, a prank call, and that there was never a bomb. We never found out who made the call though, and Jacob to this day has no idea who it could have been. There are a few pranksters in our neighborhood. Actually, we were among the biggest pranksters in the neighborhood. Still doesn't explain how the caller knew that Jacob would be on the downstairs phone, and that there was another phone upstairs. And further, it seems that the caller knew who he was speaking to. Who would do a prank this sinister to a few vulnerable kids, home alone at night? I was working the late shift at McDonald's a few years ago, back when I lived in New Jersey. My location was inside of a shopping mall. Although it was part of the mall, we had our own entrance, so we stayed open until midnight, even though the mall closed at 9 p.m. most nights. Our windows all pointed out to the far corner of the mall's parking lot. It would be packed during the busy hours, but later at night, not many people parked there. It was usually just me and the other employees. It was a Thursday night at around 11, and I was working with my coworker June, who was a high school girl, a few years younger than me. I was in college at the time. The place was empty, but a few customers were trickling in as the night wore on. We were meant to close together, but June was feeling sick, and she took off early because of that. We were not supposed to close the place by ourselves, but it was only an hour, and I thought I could handle it, so I didn't bother calling anyone. After June left, I was standing around doing nothing for about 10 minutes. Then a single man came in. He was a little older than me, probably in his late 20s or early 30s, but he dressed like a teenager. Sideways hat, baggy clothes, that whole thing. He walked up to the counter, and I was ready to take his order. He didn't say anything though, he just stood there, about 10 feet back from the counter. It was like he was deciding, so no problem, I thought. After a minute, he turned around and left without saying a word. I didn't think much of it, because you see a lot crazier stuff than that working late at McDonald's. Yelling, fights, and there was even a robbery once. A few minutes after the man left, the phone rang. Not my phone, but the work phone. I walked over and picked it up.
Hey, when do you guys close?
A man's voice said. We're open till midnight, I told him.
No problem, I can wait,
he replied. Then the call disconnected. That last comment didn't register with me right away. My shift was ending soon, and I was way too excited to get out of that place to care about anything else. When the clock struck 12, I locked the doors and started finishing up some last-minute cleaning. Then the phone rang again. Since we were closed, I didn't have to answer it, so I decided to leave it. It rang constantly, though. It took me 10 minutes to finish up, and the phone was ringing off the hook the whole time. As I was getting ready to leave, it was still going. I went to the front of the restaurant to check something, and when I did, I looked out to the parking lot. I could see a man standing there under one of the lampposts, and he was holding a phone up to his ear. I squinted my eyes to get a better look at him, and I was pretty sure that he was the guy who came in earlier, the one with the baggy clothes. At that moment, I thought that he was also the guy calling our phone. Of course, I should have called the police right there, but at that moment, I didn't know if that was the right move. I called my friend Andrew instead, even though I had my car there. I waited in the restaurant, too scared to go out to the parking lot by myself. All the while, the phone was blaring, a constant reminder of my tormentor. I peeked around the corner and out to the parking lot one more time, and I could see that man on his phone. He was right up against the glass of the front building, and it was definitely the man I saw earlier. Andrew called when he got there, and I told him to pull up to the side entrance, which is where I was supposed to leave through. When he did, I ran out and jumped in his car. When we were leaving, I saw the guy from a distance. I don't think he even noticed that I got away. I hope he was waiting there all night. The next day, I called my boss and told her what happened. She insisted that we call the police. Even if they can't do anything, it's always a good idea to get a record of what happened. That way, if anything else happens, then it'll be easier for them to do something about it. I did file a police report, but obviously no arrests were made. I quit that job about 6 months later, and during that time, I saw the guy around once in a while. I never closed by myself after that night, though, so he never tried anything again. When I was 16 years old, my parents went on vacation together for a weekend. They offered to let me come, but I thought it would be more fun to stay home and have the house to myself. We lived in a gated community, nothing super fancy. Our house only had 2 bedrooms, and it was a single floor, one for me and one for my parents. That being said, the place had pretty good security, with a metal fence surrounding the whole thing. There were electronic locks on all the doors, and the fence was high enough that it would be really hard to climb, especially because the top had pointy-looking poles sticking up. There were around 30 homes in our community, so I didn't know everyone personally, but I would recognize almost everyone. It was rare to see a totally new face around there. Our house faced one of the pedestrian entrances, and I could see it from the living room. On the day of their departure, I said goodbye to my parents and watched their car drive off. I had my driver's license, but since they took the only car, I was stuck in the suburbs by myself. On the first night, I made some food and watched TV, and then went to bed. The next morning, I got up at around 10 a.m. and went downstairs. There was a lot of food in the house, so I made breakfast and sat around for a while. My mom had left me some money in case I needed anything, even though there was probably enough food to last for the whole weekend. By around 6 p.m., I decided to head out to the store and get some snacks. There was a small strip mall near my place that had a good grocery store. It was all about a half-hour walk for me. When I was walking down the aisles, I saw a guy standing there. He was probably a few years older than me, maybe 18 or 19. He had ripped jeans and a backwards hat. It caught my attention because he wasn't moving. He was just standing there with his head pointed down towards the floor. When I passed him, he looked up at me and shot me a really creepy smile. Not wanting any more attention, I ignored him and kept going. When I had found a few things I wanted, I went to the checkout and paid for my stuff. While I was leaving the store, I looked behind me and saw that guy walking behind. I walked a little faster and seemed to lose him. When I got home, I flopped down on the couch and started watching TV. About half an hour later, my phone started going off. I looked at the screen and saw that it was a number I didn't know. It wasn't one of my contacts, but I thought it might be one of my friends, so I answered it.
I know you're alone.
A voice said in my ear. "Who is this?" I said, hoping it was one of my friends trying to scare me.
I'm right outside,
was his only response. With that, I hung up the phone. I was pretty sure that it was just some random prank call, so I wasn't freaking out or anything. I walked around the house making sure all the doors and windows were locked though, just in case. When I got to the front window, I was about to shut the curtains, but I looked out to the front gate of the complex. Saw a guy standing out there on the other side of the gate. It was the dude that I saw before in the store. I didn't think I knew him, and I had never seen him around there before that day. After I closed the curtains, I went back to the living room and kept watching TV. My phone went off again, and I could see it was the same number as before. This time I didn't answer it. The guy would probably get bored if I ignored him, I thought. The calls didn't stop though. I was tempted to answer, but it didn't seem like a good idea. I turned off my phone instead. It was getting late anyway. By 11 o'clock, I was getting tired, so I went to the bathroom to brush my teeth and get ready for bed. It had been a few hours, so I decided to turn my phone back on. When I did, I saw a few missed calls, and also some text messages, all from that weirdo's number. When I opened one of the messages, I almost dropped my phone to the ground. It was a picture of my house from the outside, but inside the gate to our complex. I could even see my shadow behind the curtain. I still don't know how that guy got into our community. Either somebody let him in, or he climbed the fence. It's also possible that he snuck in through the vehicle gate when a car came through. Just then, my phone started to ring again, and it was that strange number again. This time I answered it. "Hey man, I'm gonna call the cops if you don't stop it," I warned him. There was not a sound in response, then the call got disconnected. I waited a few minutes trying to decide what to do. I didn't want to go to bed, because I didn't know what that guy would do if I was asleep. He was in my community, and somehow he knew which house was mine. This guy must have been a serious stalker, knowing my phone number and where I live. I decided to call the police. They sent an officer out to me and got there quickly. They stayed and patrolled the area for a while, but the guy was not found. My guess is that he got scared when I threatened to call the cops. The next day, I went on all my social media to check where I was sharing my number. I was pretty sure he must have creeped me off the internet, and that was how he knew what my phone number was. It turned out that I had my number on my Facebook profile and also on Snapchat. As soon as I saw that, I deleted it and any other personal information. The next week, I was talking to my friend Jess, and I described the guy. She pulled out her phone and showed me a picture of him on some social media profile. She said that he was really creepy and that she doesn't hang out with him anymore. To me, that confirmed it. He was a social media creep who crossed the line into real life.